I still remember the sound his breath made when he rose. It was not the labored rasp of something struggling to live. It was deeper than that, a low rumble like ice cracking across a frozen lake in spring. The kind of sound you feel in your ribs before you hear it. I have tracked wolves through starving winters, hunted wyverns along cliffs that crumbled beneath my boots, and I have never been afraid of what breathes in the dark. But when Jorvan Skybreaker drew that first breath beneath the blood-red aurora, I understood for the first time what it meant to witness something that should not exist. My name is Thalen Mar. I am a ranger of the Frostwatch, sworn to the northern kingdoms, where the wind has teeth and the sky stretches white and endless. I have walked these tundras for 23 years, long enough to know the shape of every shadow, the difference between a wolf's track and a bear's, the way snow sounds when it falls on graves. I was born in a village so small it does not appear on any map, raised by a grandmother who taught me to read the stars and a father who taught me to trust my bow. I learned early that the North does not forgive hesitation, and I learned later that some things demand more than skill to survive. They demand understanding. The understanding I sought began 3 weeks before I saw Jorvund rise. It began with a rumor carried south by traders, men with frost in their beards and fear in their eyes. They spoke of a keep that had gone silent, of a Jarl's household that no longer answered horns or sent riders. They spoke of tracks in the snow, massive prints that led to the keep's gates and then simply stopped, as though whatever made them had learned to fly. I dismissed it at first. The North is full of stories, and winter makes liars of honest men. But then the second caravan came, and the third, and the stories grew more specific. They spoke of a giant, half frozen in the wreckage of the keep's great hall, his flesh pale as moonlight, his eyes open but unseeing. They spoke of blood frozen in patterns across the floor, and of a cold that seemed to pulse from the giant's body like a heartbeat. The traders were not hysterical men. They were veterans of the ice roads, people who had seen avalanches and frostworms and lived to profit from the telling. When they spoke of the keep, their voices dropped to whispers, and their eyes would not meet mine. One of them, an old woman named Greta, who had traded furs for 40 years, pulled me aside before she left. "Whatever you find there, Ranger," she said, her weathered hand gripping my arm, "do not touch it, do not speak to it, and do not, under any circumstance, stay until nightfall." I asked her why, but she only shook her head and walked away, her cart creaking through the snow. I took the contract because no one else would. The Frostwatch pays well for impossible work, and I have built my reputation on walking into places other rangers refuse to tread. I packed light, as I always do, just my bow, my knives, dried meat, rope, a bedroll, and a small leather journal where I sketch what I find. I did not pack silver, I did not pack holy water, I did not think I would need them. A frozen giant was a curiosity, perhaps a tragedy, but nothing that required the tools of a monster hunter. I was wrong. I have been wrong about many things, but never so completely as I was about Jorvan Skybreaker. The keep stood 3 days north of the nearest settlement, perched on a ridge overlooking a valley that had once been green in summer and gold in autumn. Now it was white, blanketed in snow that had fallen without pause for weeks. The keep itself was old, built by hands that understood stone and wind, its walls thick enough to hold back the worst storms. The gates were carved with the symbols of Thrym, the frost giant god of ice and strength, images of warriors locked in eternal combat with dragons and demons. Someone had defaced them. Long scratches ran down the wood, deep gouges that looked like claw marks, but no beast I knew could reach that high or cut that deep. When I arrived, the gates hung open, and the wind moved through the halls like a living thing. The snow inside was undisturbed, smooth and perfect, as though no one had walked these floors in months. But I knew better. Snow does not lie, and the tracks I found told a story I did not want to believe. They were giant prints, each one deep enough to swallow my entire body. They led from the valley below, up the ridge, through the gates, and into the great hall. There they stopped, not faded, not covered by new snow. They simply ended, as though the giant had stepped into the hall and ceased to be. I followed them slowly, my bow strung, my breath shallow. The hall was vast, its ceiling supported by beams carved with runes I could not read. Frost covered every surface, glittering in the pale light that filtered through the shattered windows. At the far end, beneath a window that looked out onto the valley, I found Jorvund. He was enormous, even by the standards of frost giants. Easily 20 feet tall, his body sprawled across the floor like a fallen monument. His skin was pale, not the healthy blue-white of his kind, but a sickly translucent grey, and I could see the outline of veins beneath the surface, dark and webbed like cracks in ice. His armor was shattered, pieces of it scattered across the hall, and his chest was bare, marked with wounds that should have killed him. Deep gashes, precise and cruel, as though something had opened him to see what lay inside. But there was no blood. The wounds were dry, their edges frozen. And when I knelt beside him, I saw that his lips were parted, his teeth visible. They were wrong, too sharp, too long. Fangs where there should have been the blunt molars of a giant. I reached out, hesitated, then touched his arm. The skin was cold, colder than stone, colder than ice. It felt like touching the void itself, and I pulled my hand back quickly, my fingers burning. Around him, scattered across the floor, were the bodies of his household, servants, warriors, advisors, all of them drained, their flesh withered, their eyes frozen in expressions of terror. Whatever had killed them had not been quick. It had been methodical, deliberate, as though someone had taken the time to savor each death. I should have left then. I should have returned to the Frostwatch, reported what I found, and let someone else decide what to do. But I am not a man who leaves questions unanswered, and Jorvund Skybreaker was a question written in ice and blood. So I stayed. I made camp in one of the side chambers, a small room that had once been a guard post. The walls were thick, the door solid, and I could bar it from the inside. I built a small fire, ate a portion of dried meat, and waited for night. I wanted to see what happened when the sun set, wanted to know if the stories were true. I have always believed that the truth, no matter how terrible, is better than doubt. The sun fell quickly in the north, sinking below the horizon in a blaze of red and gold that stained the snow like spilled wine. I watched from the doorway of my chamber, my bow across my lap, as the light bled from the sky and the stars emerged, cold and distant. The aurora came soon after, ribbons of green and violet that danced across the heavens, and I thought for a moment that the night would pass as any other. Then the colors changed. The green faded, the violet dimmed, and the aurora turned red, a deep crimson that pulsed like a heartbeat. I had never seen such a thing. The northern lights do not bleed, they do not pulse, but these did, and as I watched, I felt the air grow colder, so cold that my breath stopped rising and hung in the air like shattered glass. That was when Jorvund moved. It was not sudden. He did not jolt upright or cry out. He simply opened his eyes, and the light of the red aurora reflected in them like twin coals. Slowly, with the deliberate patience of something that has all the time in the world, he sat up. His body moved with a terrible grace, each motion precise, controlled, as though he were relearning how to inhabit his own flesh. He turned his head, and I saw his face fully for the first time. It was still recognizably giant, broad and strong, the features carved from generations of ice and pride. But something had changed. His eyes were no longer the pale blue of frost giants. They were black, empty, twin voids that swallowed light. And when he smiled, I saw his teeth, long and sharp and stained with something darker than ice. He stood, and the floor groaned beneath his weight. 20 feet of undead titan, his body carved from frozen muscle and hunger, and he moved without sound, his footsteps no longer echoing. The bodies around him began to frost over, as though his very presence drew the warmth from the air. He turned toward the shattered window, toward the red aurora, and he breathed deep, as though tasting the air. I saw his chest expand, saw the wounds on his torso flex and move, and I realized with horror that they were not healing. They were part of him now, openings through which something dark and hungry could see. Then he spoke, and his voice was not the booming roar of a frost giant. It was soft, almost gentle, a whisper that filled the hall like smoke. "I am awake." He paused, tilted his head as though listening to something I could not hear, and then he turned. For a moment, I thought he was looking directly at me, that he had somehow sensed my presence despite the walls and the distance. But his gaze passed over my hiding place, searching for something else. He raised one massive hand, and I saw the veins beneath his skin begin to glow with a faint red light, the same color as the aurora above. Frost spread from his fingertips, crawling across the floor in intricate patterns, and wherever it touched the bodies of the dead, they shuddered and began to rise. I pressed myself against the wall of my chamber, my heart hammering so hard I was certain he would hear it. The corpses stood, their movements jerky and unnatural, and they turned toward Jorvund like flowers turning toward the sun. He gestured, a simple motion, and they began to walk. Out of the hall, through the corridors, into the courtyard beyond. I heard the gates creak open, heard the shuffle of frozen feet on stone, and then silence. Jorvund stood alone in the hall for a long moment, his head bowed, his massive shoulders slumped. He looked, for just an instant, like a man mourning what he had lost. Then he stepped through the window, his body passing through the opening without breaking the remaining glass, and vanished into the night. The aurora faded moments later, the red draining away, leaving only the cold white stars. I sat in the dark for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to make sense of what I had seen. A giant could not become a vampire. The transformation required blood, intent, the willing consumption of vampiric essence. Giants were creatures of strength and pride, immune to the subtle corruptions that claimed lesser beings. Their very nature, their connection to the elemental cold, should have rejected the undead taint. But I had seen Jorvund rise. I had heard his voice, I had watched him raise the dead with a gesture, and I knew, with a certainty that burned in my chest, that everything I believed about the limits of undeath was wrong. I did not sleep that night. I sat by my fire, feeding it sticks and scraps of wood, and I thought about what I had seen. Vampires were creatures of cunning and control, predators who hunted through seduction and manipulation. They turned mortals, elves, even the occasional dwarf, but never giants. The sheer power required to transform a being of that size, to infuse every cell with vampiric essence, would be staggering. And yet, someone had done it. Someone had sought out Jorvund Skybreaker, had chosen him specifically, and had performed a ritual so complex and terrible that it had succeeded where all logic said it should fail. The thought terrified me, but it also lit a fire in my mind. If Jorvund had been turned, someone had done it deliberately. Someone had sought him out, chosen him, transformed him for a reason. And that reason, I knew, was something I needed to understand. Because a vampire with the strength of a frost giant would be unstoppable, a living storm that could tear through armies, shatter kingdoms, reshape the world itself. And if there was one, there could be more. At dawn, I left the keep and began to track him. The snow outside was marked with his prints, massive indentations that led east toward the mountains. But these prints were different from the ones I had found before. They were lighter, as though he weighed less than he should, and they did not sink as deep. In places, they vanished entirely, only to reappear 20 or 30 feet ahead, as though he had simply stepped through the air. I followed them for hours, my breath misting in the frozen air, my eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The landscape was barren, a wasteland of white and grey, but I could feel something watching me. Not Jorvund, something else, something older. The prince led me through valleys I had never explored, past frozen lakes that reflected the sky like mirrors of glass. I saw no living things, no birds, no wolves, not even the hardy mountain goats that usually inhabited these heights. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my boots in the snow and the whistle of wind through the rocks. It felt like walking through a tomb, and perhaps I was. Perhaps the north itself was dying, drained by the hunger that now walked its frozen wastes. By midday, I found the first body. It was a reindeer, or what was left of one. The creature had been drained completely, its flesh withered, its bones visible beneath the skin like a sketch beneath canvas. There were no wounds, no marks, just a husk that looked as though it had been dead for weeks. I knelt beside it, touched the frozen hide, and felt the wrongness radiate from the corpse. This was not the work of a predator. Predators left signs, teeth marks, claw gouges, evidence of a struggle. This was something else, something that fed not on flesh but on life itself. I thought of Jorvund, of his pale skin and empty eyes, and I understood. He was not just a vampire. He was something more, something vast and terrible, and his hunger was unlike anything I had ever encountered. I found 3 more bodies before sunset, a fox, a hare, and something I could not identify, its form so withered that it was impossible to tell what it had been. Each one was the same, drained and discarded, left to freeze in the snow. I began to notice a pattern. The bodies formed a rough circle, each one equidistant from the next, and at the center of the circle was a patch of ground where nothing grew, where even the snow seemed reluctant to settle. I approached it slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, and when I reached the center, I saw what lay beneath. It was a sigil, carved into the frozen earth, its lines deep and precise. I recognized some of the symbols, runes of binding, of containment, of sacrifice. Others were unfamiliar, twisting shapes that hurt to look at, that seemed to shift when I was not looking directly at them. This was where it had happened. This was where Jorvund had been brought, where the ritual had been performed, and whoever had done it had left their mark, a declaration written in the language of blood and magic. The tracks led higher into the mountains, into a region I had never explored. The air grew thinner, the cold more brutal, and the snow began to fall again, thick flakes that clung to my cloak and obscured my vision. I pushed forward, driven by a need I could not name, and by evening I reached the entrance to a barrow. It was ancient, carved into the mountainside, its entrance marked with runes that glowed faintly in the twilight. I recognized some of them, wards against the living, warnings to the faithful, prayers to gods whose names had been forgotten. This was a tomb, but not for the dead. It was a prison. The entrance was a mouth of stone, 10 feet high and twice as wide, its edges carved with images of giants in chains. I could see deeper carvings beyond, stretching into the darkness, but the light was fading fast, and I knew that entering now would be suicide. I made camp a short distance away, behind an outcropping of rock that provided some shelter from the wind. I built no fire. I did not want to be seen. I ate a small portion of dried meat, drank melted snow from my canteen, and watched the entrance as night fell. The red aurora came again, spreading across the sky like a wound, and with it came the cold. Not the natural cold of winter, but something deeper, something that seemed to seep from the very stones. I wrapped myself in my cloak, drew my knees to my chest, and waited. I could hear something moving in the barrow, a soft scraping sound like stone against stone. It grew louder, closer, and then I saw them. They emerged from the entrance one by one, pale figures draped in robes that seemed woven from shadow. They were tall, taller than men but shorter than giants, and they moved with a fluid grace that was almost hypnotic. I counted 7 of them, each one identical to the next, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. They formed a circle at the entrance to the barrow, and then they began to chant. The words were in no language I recognized, harsh and guttural, filled with sounds that scraped against my ears like broken glass. The air around them began to shimmer, and I saw the snow at their feet begin to melt, not into water but into a dark, viscous liquid that pooled on the ground. The liquid began to glow with the same red light as the aurora, and as it spread, I saw shapes forming within it. Faces, twisted in agony, screaming silently. Hands reaching up, grasping at air that would not hold them. Souls, I realized. They were pulling souls from somewhere, feeding on them, drawing power from their suffering. The ritual lasted for hours. I watched from my hiding place, frozen not just by cold but by fear, as the figures drained the souls and consumed them one by one. When it was finished, when the last soul had been devoured and the liquid had evaporated into mist, the figures turned as one and looked directly at me. I did not move. I did not breathe. I simply stared back, and for a moment, I thought they would come for me. Then they turned and disappeared back into the barrow, their robes flowing like water, and I was alone again. I did not sleep. I could not. I sat in the dark, my bow across my lap, and I tried to make sense of what I had seen. The figures were vampires, that much was clear, but they were unlike any vampire I had heard of. They did not hunt individually, did not seduce or manipulate. They worked as a collective, a bloodline bound by ritual and purpose. And they were feeding on more than blood. They were consuming souls, drawing power from the essence of the dead. If they had turned Jorvund, if they had infused him with that kind of power, then he was not just a vampire, he was a conduit, a vessel through which they could channel their hunger on a massive scale. I understood then why they had chosen a giant. It was not just about strength or size, it was about capacity. A giant could hold more power, could feed on entire herds, entire valleys, without being destroyed by the hunger. And if they could create one giant vampire, they could create more. An army of undead titans, each one capable of reshaping the landscape with their presence. The thought was so terrible, so overwhelming, that I nearly fled then and there. But I stayed, because I had seen Jorvund's face in the hall, seen the sorrow in his eyes before he raised the dead, and I knew that some part of him still remembered what it meant to be mortal. At dawn, I steeled myself and entered the barrow. The passage was narrow at first, barely wide enough for me to walk through without turning sideways. The walls were smooth, carved by hands that understood stone in ways I could not comprehend. Runes covered every surface, glowing faintly in the darkness, and I recognized more of them now. Wards against divination, bindings to prevent escape, prayers to forgotten gods who had turned their faces away from the light. This was not just a tomb. It was a sanctuary, a place where the bloodline had gathered for centuries, hiding from the sun and the eyes of the living. The passage opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, and the floor was covered in frost that glittered like scattered diamonds. At the center of the chamber stood a sarcophagus, massive and black, its surface carved with images I could barely make out. Giants kneeling before a figure cloaked in darkness, a crown of bones resting on a throne of ice and blood, a ritual circle identical to the one I had found in the valley, surrounded by bodies frozen in eternal supplication. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, and as I drew closer, I saw that the sarcophagus was open. The lid had been pushed aside, resting against the wall, and inside, the stone was stained with something dark and old. Blood, not fresh, but preserved, frozen in time by the cold and the magic woven into the stone. I could see the patterns it made, swirling shapes that formed words in languages I did not know. I reached out, hesitated, then touched the edge of the sarcophagus. The stone was warm, not hot, but warm, as though something inside it still burned. I pulled my hand back quickly, my fingers tingling, and I knew without touching it that this was where it had begun. This was where Jorvund had been brought, where he had been laid inside, where the bloodline had opened his veins and poured their essence into him. This was the altar where a Jarl had become a monster. The answer came from the shadows. You seek to understand. The voice was not Jorvund's. It was softer, colder, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I spun, my bow raised, but I saw nothing, only darkness, shifting and alive. You followed the giant. You saw him rise. You wonder why we chose him. I forced my voice to stay steady. Who are you? The darkness laughed, a sound like wind through dead trees. We are the blood that does not freeze. We are the hunger that shapes the storm. We are what remains when the gods turn away. We have walked these mountains for 1,000 years, feeding on the small and the forgotten, but we grew tired of scraps. We desired more, power that could reshape the world, hunger that could consume nations, and so we sought a vessel worthy of our gifts. A figure stepped from the shadows, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It was tall, almost as tall as a man, draped in robes that seemed woven from mist and moonlight. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could see its hands, pale and delicate, each finger ending in a nail as sharp as glass. When it moved, it made no sound, as though it weighed nothing at all. And when it spoke, its voice was filled with something that might have been pride. We watched the frost giants for centuries, it said. We studied their strength, their pride, their connection to the cold. Most were unworthy, too violent, too stupid, too consumed by their own petty wars. But Jorvund was different. He was a Jarl, a leader, a warrior who had united clans that had fought for generations. He was strong, yes, but he was also intelligent, cunning, and he was dying. The figure circled me slowly, its movements fluid and predatory. Age comes for all things, even giants. Jorvund felt it in his bones, the slow creep of mortality, and it terrified him. He did not want to fade. He did not want to be forgotten. So when we came to him, when we offered him eternity, he listened. We showed him the power we could grant, the strength that would never fade, the hunger that would make him a god among his kind, and he accepted. I felt my grip tighten on my bow. You tricked him. The figure tilted its head. We offered him a choice. He made it freely. We did not lie about what he would become. We told him the cost. We told him that his hunger would be vast, that it would shape the weather itself, that he would feed on life as easily as breathing. And he said yes, because in the end, all mortals are the same. They fear death more than they fear what comes after. Then why tell me this? I asked. Why not simply kill me? The figure laughed again, and this time the sound was filled with genuine amusement. Because you will tell others. You will carry the story south, and they will come. Hunters, heroes, fools who believe they can stop what we have created. And when they come, Jorvund will feed. He will grow stronger with each soul he consumes, and we will spread. One giant at a time, we will transform them, until the entire north belongs to us. And then, when the north is ours, we will turn south, toward warmer lands, toward cities fat with life, and we will consume them all. I raised my bow, aimed at the figure's chest. I won't let that happen. The figure did not move. It simply stood there, watching me, and I felt the weight of its gaze like a physical thing. You are brave, Ranger, but bravery is not enough. You have seen what Jorvund has become. You know what he can do. A single strike from him would shatter every bone in your body. A single breath would freeze the blood in your veins. You cannot stop him, not with arrows and steel, not with courage and determination. You would need an army. You would need magic. You would need the gods themselves to intervene. And the gods, Ranger, do not care about the north. They abandoned these lands long ago. I held my aim, my arms steady, my breath calm. Then I'll find another way. The figure tilted its head, as though considering my words. Perhaps you will. Perhaps you will find allies, gather resources, return here with the tools you need. Or perhaps you will simply die in the snow, another forgotten soul consumed by the cold. It matters little to us. Time is on our side. We have waited 1,000 years. We can wait 1,000 more. The figure stepped back into the shadows and vanished, leaving me alone in the chamber. I stood there for a long time, my bow still raised, my heart pounding, and then I turned and ran. I ran through the passage, through the snow, down the mountain, until my legs gave out and I collapsed in the frozen grass. I lay there, staring at the sky, and I thought about what I had seen, a vampire bloodline old enough to have forgotten the names of kingdoms, a collective that fed on souls and transformed giants into weapons, and a hunter, alone and outmatched, who had been given a choice. I could run. I could return to the Frostwatch, tell them what I had learned, and let them decide. Or I could stay. I could find Jorvund, face him, and try to end this before it spread. The choice felt impossible. But as I lay in the snow, I thought about the reindeer I had found, drained and discarded. I thought about the valleys that would fall, the lives that would be lost, if Jorvund was allowed to hunt unchecked. And I thought about the figure in the barrow, its voice full of certainty, its laughter full of contempt. It believed I would run. It believed I would fail. I decided, then and there, that I would prove it wrong. I rose to my feet, brushed the snow from my cloak and began to walk, not south, toward safety, but north, toward the red aurora that I knew would come again. I did not have a plan. I did not have silver or holy water or the blessings of gods I had never trusted, but I had my bow, my knives, and a stubbornness that had kept me alive through 23 winters. And I had something else, something the figure in the barrow had not accounted for. I had seen Jorvund rise, I had heard his voice, and I knew, with a certainty that burned brighter than fear, that he was not a god. He was a giant who had made a terrible choice, and somewhere inside that undead shell, some part of him still remembered what it meant to be mortal. I would find that part, I would speak to it, and if I could not save him, I would at least make sure he remembered what he had lost. The first storm came 2 nights later. I was camped in a shallow cave, my fire burning low, when I felt the air change. It was not the slow shift of weather, the gradual build of wind and cloud. It was sudden, violent, as though the sky itself had been torn open. I stepped outside and looked up, and I saw the aurora again, red and pulsing, stretching across the heavens like veins of blood. The wind rose, howling through the valley, and the snow began to fall, thick and heavy, each flake tinged with crimson. I knew immediately what it meant. Jorvund was hunting. I followed the storm, moving through the snow with my cloak pulled tight around me. The wind fought me with every step, trying to push me back, but I pressed forward, my eyes fixed on the red light above. The storm grew stronger as I climbed, the snow so thick I could barely see my own hands, and the cold became something alive, something that clawed at my skin and tried to pull the warmth from my bones. But I did not stop. I could feel him now, a presence that pressed against my mind like a weight, cold and vast and hungry. And then, through the swirling white, I saw him. He stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, his body silhouetted against the red aurora, and he was feeding. Below him, a herd of elk lay scattered across the snow, their bodies drained, their eyes frozen open in expressions of terror. But Jorvund was not kneeling among them. He was standing, his arms outstretched, his head tilted back, and I could see the light flowing from the corpses into him. It was not blood, it was something more fundamental, a pale glow that rose from the bodies like steam and flowed through the air toward Jorvund's chest. The wounds on his torso were open, pulsing, and as the light entered him, I saw his skin begin to glow with the same crimson radiance as the aurora above. The storm around him grew stronger with each pulse. The wind howled, the snow fell harder, and I realized with horror that he was not just feeding on the elk, he was feeding on the storm itself, drawing power from the very air, from the cold and the wind and the fury of winter. He was becoming the storm, merging with it, until it was impossible to tell where Jorvund ended and the blizzard began. I nocked an arrow, drew my bow, and aimed at his chest. My hands were steady, my breath was calm. I had killed wyverns with a single shot, brought down wolves mid-leap, pierced the hearts of bandits who thought themselves untouchable. But as I looked at Jorvund, at the sheer size of him, the power radiating from his body, I knew that a single arrow would do nothing. He was too strong, too vast, too merged with the elements themselves. And yet, I loosed it anyway, because doing nothing was not an option, because I needed him to know that someone was still willing to fight. The arrow flew true, crossing the distance in a heartbeat, and struck him in the shoulder. It sank deep, the shaft vanishing into his flesh, and for a moment I thought it had worked. The glow around him flickered, the storm hesitated, and I saw him turn his head slowly, as though noticing me for the first time. Then he reached up, pulled the arrow free with a casual motion, and let it fall to the snow. The wound closed instantly, the flesh knitting together as though it had never been touched. He rose to his full height, 20 feet of undead titan, and he spoke, his voice carrying across the storm like thunder. "You are brave, little hunter, but bravery is wasted on the already dead." He stepped toward me, and the ground shook with each footfall. Snow cascaded down the slope, trees bent and cracked under the force of the wind, and I saw the elk corpses begin to rise, their movements jerky and unnatural, their eyes glowing with the same red light. I nocked another arrow, loosed it, and watched it strike his chest. He did not even flinch. I fired again, and again, each shot precise, each one useless. The arrows stuck in his flesh like pins in a map, marking places on his body but doing no damage, causing no pain. He was beyond pain, beyond mortality, beyond anything my weapons could touch. He was upon me in seconds, his shadow swallowing me whole, and I saw his hand descend, massive and pale, reaching for my throat. I dropped my bow, drew my knife, and drove it upward with all my strength. The blade struck his palm, pierced the skin, and I felt the cold rush through me, so intense it burned. It was not the cold of winter, it was the cold of the void, the emptiness between stars, the absence of all warmth and life. My vision blurred, my limbs went numb, and I felt my heart begin to slow. This was how I would die, I thought. Frozen and forgotten in the snow, another victim of the hunger that walked the north. But Jorvun did not crush me. He lifted me into the air as though I weighed nothing, his hand around my chest, careful not to break me, and he stared into my eyes. I hung there, suspended above the snow, my breath coming in short gasps, and I saw something flicker in his black eyes. Not hunger, not cruelty, something else, something almost human. Recognition. You, he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. You were in the keep. You watched me rise. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely a whisper. I did. He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made me feel like an insect beneath glass. Why did you not run? Because I needed to understand, I said, the words painful in my frozen throat. I needed to know why. He was silent for a long time, his gaze never leaving mine, and the storm around us began to quiet. The wind fell, the snow slowed, and I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat, weak and irregular. Then he lowered me to the ground, gently, as though placing something fragile on a shelf. He did not release me completely, but he loosened his grip, and I felt warmth begin to return to my limbs. You want to understand, he said, his voice filled with something I had not expected, sorrow. Then I will tell you. I will tell you what it means to become what I am, and you will carry that knowledge back to your people. You will tell them that Jorvun Skybreaker is no more, and that what walks in his place is something they should fear. He stepped back, releasing me fully, and I collapsed to my knees in the snow. He stood above me, his massive form blocking out the stars, and he began to speak. I was a Jarl, he said. I ruled the ice fields for 300 years. I commanded 5 clans, held the passes against the dragons, drove back the demons when they tried to breach the northern gates. I was strong, I was feared. My name was spoken with respect from the spine of the world to the sea of moving ice. I had wealth, power, a hall carved from a glacier, and a legacy that would outlive me for generations. But I was also dying. He paused, and I saw his hand clench into a fist. Age comes slowly to frost giants, but it comes. I felt it in my bones, the slow erosion of strength, the way my breath came harder after battle. I began to forget names, to lose track of days. My advisors noticed, my warriors whispered, and I knew that soon they would challenge me. Someone younger, stronger, hungrier for power, and I would fall, I would die, and everything I had built would crumble. His voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. That was when they came to me. The bloodline. They appeared in my hall one night, 7 figures in robes of shadow, and they offered me a choice. They told me they could grant me immortality, that I would never age, never weaken, never die. They said I would become stronger than I had ever been, that my power would shape the very storms, that I would be a god among giants. All I had to do was accept their gift. I asked them what the cost would be. They did not lie. They told me I would hunger, that I would need to feed on life itself to sustain my new form. They told me I would lose my connection to the sun, that I would walk only in darkness or beneath the light of the moon. They told me I would be bound to them, part of their bloodline, and that I would serve their purpose. But they also told me I would live forever. I would be strong forever. I would never be forgotten. He looked down at me, and I saw tears forming in his black eyes, freezing as they fell. I said yes. I let them lead me to the barrow, let them lay me in the sarcophagus, let them open my veins and pour their essence into me. I felt the transformation begin, felt my heart slow and then stop, felt my breath turn to ice in my lungs. And I felt the hunger rise, a void inside me that demanded to be filled. When I woke, I was no longer Jorvund Skybreaker. I was something new, something terrible. And the first thing I did was feed on my own household. His voice broke, and he turned away from me. I did not mean to, I did not want to, but the hunger was too strong. It consumed me, drove me, and I could not stop. I drained my servants, my warriors, my advisors, people I had known for centuries, people I had fought beside, laughed with, mourned with. I killed them all, and I felt nothing but satisfaction as their life flowed into me. That was when I understood. The bloodline had not lied. They had told me the cost, but they had not told me what I would lose. My compassion, my honor, my very soul. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with anguish. I am still Jorvund. I still remember who I was, but I am also the hunger. I am the storm. I cannot stop it, any more than I can stop the wind. Every night, when the aurora turns red, I rise and I feed. I drain herds, forests, entire valleys, and with each feeding I grow stronger, the storm grows larger, and the hunger grows deeper. Soon there will be nothing left in the north, and then I will turn south. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking, my body screaming in protest. Then fight it, I said. You are still Jorvund. You still remember. You can choose. He shook his head slowly, and the sorrow in his eyes deepened. No, the hunger is too strong. It shapes me. It controls me. I am a prisoner in my own body, watching as my hands drain the life from everything they touch. I cannot fight it. I cannot stop it. All I can do is warn you. Tell your people to stay away from the north. Tell them that what walks here is beyond salvation. Tell them that Jorvund Skybreaker died in that barrow, and what rose in his place is not to be pitied or saved. It is to be feared. And it is to be destroyed. How? I asked. How do I destroy you? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he spoke, his voice barely audible. The bloodline. They are the source of my power, the anchor that binds me to this form. Sever the connection, and I will be free. I will die, truly die, and the hunger will die with me. But they are old, Ranger, older than kingdoms, older than gods, and they will not let me go easily. Where are they? I asked. He looked toward the mountains, toward the barrow carved into the stone. They sleep in the deep places, in tombs older than memory. But they are not alone. They have servants, thralls bound to their will. And they have magic, rituals that can reshape reality itself. If you wish to face them, you will need more than arrows and courage. You will need allies, power, the blessing of forces greater than yourself. He stepped back, and the storm began to rise again. The wind howled, the snow fell harder, and I felt the cold begin to seep back into my bones. Go, he said, his voice growing louder, more distant. Tell your people, warn them, and if you find a way to end this, to sever the bloodline's hold, then come back. I will be waiting. I will be grateful. But until then, stay away. Because the next time we meet, the hunger may be too strong, and I may not be able to stop myself from draining you dry. He turned and walked into the storm, his massive form disappearing into the white, and I was left alone on the ridge. The elk corpses lay around me, drained and frozen, and above me, the red aurora pulsed like a heartbeat. I stood there for a long time, my mind reeling, my body shaking, and then I turned south and began to walk. The journey back to the Frostwatch took longer than it should have. I was weak, exhausted, my body pushed beyond its limits by the cold and the encounter with Jorvund. I moved slowly, stopping frequently to rest, to eat, to warm myself by small fires that provided little comfort. The landscape seemed emptier than before, as though the life had been drained from it, and I saw no living creatures, no birds, no wolves, not even tracks in the snow. The north was dying, consumed by the hunger that walked its frozen wastes. When I finally reached the outpost, I went straight to the commander. Corvin was in his office, reviewing reports, and he looked up as I entered. His eyes widened when he saw me. I must have looked like a corpse, pale and gaunt, my clothes torn, my face marked with frostbite. "Thalen," he said, standing quickly. "What happened?" I told him everything. The keep, Jorvund, the barrow, the bloodline, the ritual, the feeding. I spoke without stopping, without pausing for breath, and Corvin listened in silence. When I finished, he sat back down, his face pale, and he stared at the map on his desk for a long time. "You want me to send an army north," he said finally, "to fight a giant vampire and a bloodline of creatures we cannot see." "Yes," he shook his head. "I cannot do that, Thalen. Not on the word of one ranger, no matter how trusted. The north is vast. We do not have the men to patrol every valley, every mountain, and even if we did, what you describe is beyond our strength. A giant turned vampire, a bloodline that feeds on souls, storms that drain the life from the land. That is not something we can fight with swords and arrows. It would require magic, divine intervention, resources we do not have." I felt the frustration rise in my chest, hot and sharp. "Then what do you suggest?" Corvin leaned forward, his eyes hard. "I suggest you find those resources. You are a ranger, Thalen. You know how to track, how to hunt, how to survive. Use those skills. Find someone who can help you. A wizard, a cleric, a paladin. Someone with the power to face what you have seen. Bring them to me, and I will support you. I will give you the men and supplies you need. But I cannot commit the Frostwatch to a campaign based on rumors and shadows. I need proof. I need allies. I need a plan." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that every day we waited was another day the bloodline grew stronger, another valley drained, another step toward the inevitable spread of their corruption. But I knew he was right. An army of soldiers would be useless against Jorvund. They would be sheep walking into a slaughterhouse. I needed something more, someone more. I left the outpost that night, my pack lighter than it had been, my resolve heavier. I did not know where to begin, but I knew I could not give up. I had seen the sorrow in Jorvund's eyes, heard the plea in his voice. He wanted to be free. He wanted to die. And I had made a promise, not in words but in action. I would find a way to end this. The search took weeks. I traveled south, through villages and towns, asking questions, following rumors. I spoke to priests who claimed to know the secrets of undeath, to wizards who studied the plains and the creatures that dwelled there. Most of them laughed when I told them about Jorvund. Some offered advice that was worse than useless, rituals that would only make him stronger, spells that would bind me to the same fate. But I kept searching, driven by the memory of his voice, the weight of his words. Eventually, in a small temple dedicated to the Raven Queen in a town I had never heard of, I found someone who listened. Her name was Sariel, and she was a cleric of the Raven Queen, a woman who had walked the Shadowfell and returned with knowledge that most mortals could not comprehend. She was young, perhaps 30, with silver hair that fell to her shoulders and eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone. When I told her about Jorvund, about the bloodline, about the transformation and the hunger, she did not laugh. She did not dismiss me. She simply nodded, as though she had been expecting this. "A giant vampire," she said, her voice soft and measured. "Rare, but not impossible. The transformation would require immense power, an understanding of both vampiric essence and giant physiology that few possess. And you say they are spreading, that they intend to transform more giants." "Yes," I said. "The figure in the barrow told me. They want to create an army of undead titans to consume the north and then turn south." Sariel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. "The Raven Queen does not look kindly on those who pervert death, who bind souls to flesh against their will. Vampirism is an affront to the natural order, a corruption of the cycle she oversees. If what you say is true, if this bloodline is creating giant vampires, then they are her enemies, and I am her instrument." She turned to face me, her silver eyes bright with determination. "I will help you, Ranger. I will go north with you. I will face this bloodline, and I will do everything in my power to sever their hold on Jorvund Skybreaker. But you must understand, this will not be easy. Vampires of that strength do not fall to simple prayers or holy symbols. We will need to weaken them first, disrupt their rituals, sever the connection between Jorvund and the bloodline. And that means returning to the Barrow." I felt a weight lift from my chest, the first real hope I had felt in weeks. "Then we go north." Sariel smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "You understand what this means, Ranger. If we fail, we will not return. The North does not forgive mistakes, and the Raven Queen, for all her power, cannot protect us from our own hubris. We will be walking into the heart of their domain, facing creatures that have lived for centuries, that have perfected the art of killing. We may die. We almost certainly will be tested beyond anything you have experienced. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Jorvund, standing on the ridge, tears freezing on his face. I thought of the valleys he would drain, the lives he would consume if I did nothing. And I thought of the promise I had made, the choice I had taken when I decided to return to the mountains instead of fleeing south. "I am," I said. "I have to be." We left the next morning, two travelers moving through a world that had grown colder, darker, as though the very land could feel the weight of what we were about to face. Sariel was quiet for most of the journey, her lips moving in silent prayer, her hands tracing symbols in the air that I could not see. I did not disturb her, I simply walked beside her, my bow across my back, my mind focused on the path ahead. As we traveled, she told me about the Raven Queen, about the goddess who ruled the Shadowfell and shepherded souls to their final rest. She spoke of death not as an ending but as a transition, a necessary part of the cycle that kept the multiverse in balance. And she spoke of those who defied that cycle, who clung to life beyond their allotted time, who twisted death into something unnatural and cruel. "Vampires are parasites," she said one evening as we camped beneath a stand of pine trees. "They exist outside the cycle, feeding on the living to sustain their unliving bodies. In small numbers, they are a nuisance, a reminder that even death can be corrupted. But in large numbers, organized and purposeful, they are a plague. They drain the world of life, leaving only husks and shadows. The Raven Queen tolerates their existence only because destroying them all would require more intervention than she is willing to make. But when they cross certain lines, when they begin to threaten the balance itself, she acts. And I am one of her tools." "What can you do?" I asked. "Against something like Jorvund?" She was silent for a moment, her eyes distant. "I can weaken the bonds that hold him. Vampirism is sustained by magic, by the connection between the vampire and the source of their power. In Jorvund's case, that source is the bloodline, the collective that transformed him. If I can sever that connection, even temporarily, his power will fade. He will become vulnerable, mortal, and in that moment, if he chooses, he can die, truly die, and his soul will be free to pass on." "And if he doesn't choose?" I asked. She looked at me, her expression grave. "Then he will remain bound, and we will have to destroy him by force. I have spells that can harm undead, that can burn away the necrotic energy that sustains them. But against a giant, even a weakened one, they may not be enough. That is where you come in. You will need to strike the final blow, to drive a stake through his heart or sever his head, and you will need to do it quickly, before the bloodline can restore the connection." I nodded, though the thought of facing Jorvund in combat, even a weakened Jorvund, filled me with dread. "What about the bloodline? If we sever the connection, won't they just create it again?" "Yes," Sariel said, "which is why we must destroy them as well. We must enter the Barrow, find where they sleep, and end them before they can retaliate. It will be dangerous. They will have wards, traps, servants. But if we succeed, Jorvund will be free, and the threat they pose will be ended. For now." "For now?" I asked. She smiled grimly. "Vampiric bloodlines are like weeds, Ranger. Cut one down, and another will grow in its place. But we do what we can, where we can. That is all the gods ask of us. We reached the barrow 3 weeks later, in the dead of winter, when the nights were longest and the sun barely rose above the horizon. The entrance was still open, the runes still glowing, and as we approached, I felt the familiar weight of dread settle over me. Sariel stopped a short distance away, her eyes fixed on the carvings that adorned the entrance. "This is old magic," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Older than the kingdoms of men, older than the elven empires. Whoever built this place understood death in ways we have forgotten. They knew how to bind souls, how to trap them between life and the afterlife. This is not just a tomb, it is a prison, and we are about to enter it." She turned to me, her expression serious. "Once we step inside, there is no turning back. The bloodline will know we are here. They will send everything they have to stop us. Are you ready?" I drew my bow, nocked an arrow, and nodded. "I am." We stepped through the entrance, and the darkness swallowed us whole. The passage was, as I remembered, narrow and oppressive, the walls covered in glowing runes that pulsed with a sickly green light. Sariel moved ahead of me, her hand outstretched, and I saw a silver radiance emanate from her palm, brighter and purer than any torch. It pushed back the darkness, revealing the passage ahead, and we walked in silence, our footsteps echoing off the stone. The air grew colder as we descended, so cold that my breath frosted in the air and my fingers began to go numb. I could hear something moving in the darkness ahead, a soft scraping sound like claws on stone. Sariel heard it too, and she raised her hand higher, the light intensifying. The scraping stopped, replaced by a hiss, sharp and filled with rage. Then they came. They emerged from the shadows, pale figures with elongated limbs and mouths full of needle-sharp teeth. Vampire spawn, I realized, the lesser servants of the bloodline, created to defend their masters. There were dozens of them, their eyes glowing red in the darkness, and they moved with a terrible speed, scuttling along the walls and ceiling like spiders. I loosed an arrow, struck one in the chest, and watched it explode into ash. Sariel raised her other hand, and a wave of silver light erupted from her palm, washing over the spawn like a tide. They screamed, their bodies burning, and many of them dissolved before they could reach us. But not all of them. 3 broke through the light, their bodies smoking, and they lunged at us with claws extended. I dropped my bow, drew my knives, and met the first one head-on. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my cloak and drawing blood, but I drove my blade into its throat and twisted. It convulsed, hissed, and then crumbled to dust. The second came at me from the side, but Sariel was faster. She spoke a word of power, and a bolt of silver energy struck the spawn in the head, reducing it to ash. The third retreated, hissing, and vanished back into the shadows. We continued forward, moving deeper into the barrow, and the attacks came more frequently. Spawn appeared from every crevice, every shadow, and we fought them off with arrows and spells and sheer determination. My arms grew tired, my quiver lighter, and I could see the strain on Sariel's face, the effort it took to maintain the light and cast her spells. But we did not stop. We could not. Finally, after what felt like hours, the passage opened into the vast chamber I had seen before. The sarcophagus stood at the center, dark and imposing, and around it were the 7 figures in robes of shadow. They turned as we entered, their faces still hidden beneath their hoods, and I felt the temperature drop even further. Sariel stepped forward, her hand glowing brighter, and she spoke in a voice that echoed through the chamber like thunder. "In the name of the Raven Queen, I command you to release Jorvan Skybreaker from your bonds. You have perverted death, twisted a soul against its will, and created an abomination that threatens the natural order. Surrender now, or face her judgment." The figures did not move. They simply stood there, silent and still, and then one of them spoke. Its voice was the same I had heard before, soft and cold and filled with contempt. "You are a fool, little cleric. You think your goddess can touch us here, in this place where we have dwelt for 1,000 years. We are beyond her reach, beyond her judgment, and you are nothing but meat, walking into our domain, begging to be consumed." The figure raised its hand, and the air around it began to shimmer. I felt a pressure build in my skull, a crushing weight that made it hard to think, hard to breathe. Sariel cried out, staggered, and I saw the light in her hand flicker. The other 6 figures began to move, circling us, their robes flowing like water, and I knew that we were about to die. But Sariel was not finished. She straightened, her eyes blazing with silver light, and she raised both hands above her head. The light exploded from her, filling the chamber, so bright it was like staring into the sun. The figures recoiled, hissing, and I saw their robes begin to smoke and burn. Sariel began to chant, her voice rising above the hissing and the screams, and I felt the air grow warmer, as though the light was burning away the cold. "Raven Queen," she cried, "I call upon you. I invoke your name, your power, your dominion over death. These creatures have defied you. They have twisted your domain, corrupted the cycle, and I beg you to act. Grant me the strength to end them. Grant me the power to free the soul they have enslaved." For a moment, nothing happened. Then I felt it, a presence, vast and terrible, pressing down on the chamber like the weight of the sky. The air grew still, the hissing stopped, and I saw the figures freeze, their movements suddenly stiff and uncertain. A voice spoke, not in words but in feeling, a command that resonated in my bones. "Release him." The figures screamed, a sound like wind through shattered glass, and they began to dissolve. Not into ash, but into mist, their forms unraveling, their robes disintegrating. The sarcophagus began to crack, the stones splitting, and I saw the blood inside begin to boil and evaporate. The bonds were breaking, the connection was severing. And somewhere, in the frozen wastes above, I knew that Jorvund felt it. Sariel collapsed, her body crumpling to the floor, and I ran to her side. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. The chamber was empty now, the figures gone, the sarcophagus shattered. I lifted her carefully, cradling her in my arms, and I turned toward the passage. We had done it. We had severed the bloodline's hold. Now all that remained was to find Jorvund and help him make his final choice. I carried Sariel through the passage, up toward the entrance, and when we emerged into the night, I saw the red aurora above. It was fading, its light growing dim, and I knew that Jorvund was weakening. I set Sariel down gently, wrapped her in my cloak, and then I turned north, toward the ridge where I had first confronted him. The climb was brutal. My body was exhausted, my arms aching from carrying Sariel, my legs weak from days of fighting and walking. But I pushed forward, driven by the need to reach him, to see this through to the end. When I reached the ridge, I found him kneeling in the snow, his body hunched, his arms wrapped around his chest. The glow was gone from his skin, the wounds on his torso no longer pulsing, and his eyes, when he looked up at me, were no longer black. They were pale blue, the color of ice, the color of a frost giant. "You did it," he said, his voice weak, barely a whisper. "I can feel it. The hunger is fading. The storm is dying. I am becoming myself again." I knelt beside him, my breath coming in short gasps. "You can choose now, Jorvund. You can let go. You can find peace." He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, freezing before they hit the snow. "I do not deserve peace, Ranger. I have killed so many. I have drained valleys, destroyed herds, consumed souls. How can I find peace when I carry that weight?" "Because you did not choose it," I said. "You were tricked, you were bound, and now you are free. What you do with that freedom is up to you." He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the aurora above, now barely visible, a faint red glow that was fading with each passing moment. Then he smiled, a sad, weary smile, and he nodded. "I choose peace," he said. "I choose to let go." He closed his eyes, and I saw his body begin to change. The pale skin darkened, the wounds closed, and his chest rose and fell one last time. Then he was still, his massive form sinking into the snow, and I knew that he was gone, truly gone. The curse was broken. The hunger was ended, and Jorvund Skybreaker had found the peace he sought. I sat beside him for a long time, watching the sun begin to rise, the first true dawn I had seen in weeks. The sky turned gold and pink, the snow glittered like diamonds, and I felt a warmth begin to return to the land. The north was healing, slowly, painfully, but healing. When I finally stood, my body aching, my heart heavy, I walked back to where I had left Sariel. She was awake, sitting up, her silver eyes watching me with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It is done," I said. She nodded. I felt it. The connection is severed, the bloodline is destroyed, and Jorvund is free. We descended the mountain together, moving slowly, our bodies broken, our spirits exhausted. When we reached the outpost, Corvin was waiting. He looked at us, at our torn clothing and empty hands, and he asked a single question. "Did you stop him?" I nodded. "We did. Jorvund Skybreaker is no more." Corvin studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Then the north is safe." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that it was over, that the bloodline had been destroyed completely, that no other giants would fall to the hunger. But I knew better. The north is vast, and the darkness is patient. Somewhere, in the frozen wastes, other bloodlines waited. Other rituals were being performed, and one day they would rise again. But for now, there was peace, and I would take it for as long as it lasted. I left the Frostwatch soon after, choosing to wander rather than serve. I have walked the tundras alone for months now, tracking wolves and bears and the ghosts of storms long past. I do not speak of Jorvund often. Most would not believe me, but sometimes, when the aurora comes, when the light dances across the sky, I think of him. I think of the choice he made, the peace he found, and I wonder if I will be strong enough to make the same choice when my time comes. I still carry my bow. I still track the impossible, and I still believe, despite everything, that the truth is worth the cost, because I have seen what happens when a giant becomes a vampire. I have seen the storm it creates, the hunger it feeds, and the silence it leaves behind, and I have seen, in the end, that even monsters can choose redemption, that even the damned can find peace, that even in the frozen north, where the wind has teeth and the sky stretches white and endless, there is hope. The north does not forgive, but sometimes, if you are willing to walk into the cold, to face the darkness, to stand against the impossible, it teaches you what it means to be free. And that, I think, is a lesson worth learning.